My name is Emma Carter. I'm 29 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've been a nurse, not the glamorous kind you see on TV, no. I've spent the last 6 years working in a small elderly care facility in upstate New York, a place where time moves slowly, the halls echo with silence, and birthdays are often forgotten by everyone except the staff. I didn't choose this job for the paycheck. I chose it because I've always believed people deserve kindness, especially at the end of their lives. When most of the world has already stopped paying attention, I've held the hands of strangers as they took their final breaths. I've watched once brilliant minds fade into confusion. I've comforted people whose own families never visited. That's where I met Eleanor Hayes. To most of the staff, she was difficult, sharp-tongued, private, impossible to please. People whispered that she was a bitter old woman who used to be rich. No husband, no children who visited, no friends who called, just a name on a door and a long list of medications. But something about her intrigued me. Maybe it was the way she stared out the window every morning like she was waiting for someone who'd never come. Or maybe it was the loneliness in her voice when she said, "Just leave the food. I don't need anything else." So I didn't walk away like the others did. I stayed. I didn't know it then, but that decision would change everything. And in the end, it would lead to a secret no one, not even a me, could have imagined. Room 107 always felt colder than the others. It wasn't the thermostat. I checked it 100 times. It was something else. The walls carried a stillness, like even sound itself refused to linger there. It was Eleanor Hayes' room. And at first, I kept my distance. I had heard the stories from the other nurses. "Don't bother being nice," one said. "She'll just snap at you." Another claimed she once threw a water pitcher at an aide for fluffing her pillows the wrong way. "She's rich," they said. Or was. Probably thinks we're all below her. The first time I walked into her room, she didn't look at me. She just said, "Don't speak unless I ask you something." I nodded and quietly changed her IV bag. Over the next few days, our conversations were like stone steps, cold, small, predictable. I learned she liked her tea at 4 p.m. sharp, and that she hated being asked how she felt. "I'm in a nursing home," she once said dryly. "How do you think I feel?" But I kept coming back, not out of duty, but because I saw something in her that I couldn't ignore. Pain, real pain, not just physical, the kind that lives behind the eyes and lingers like a storm that never passes. One day, she asked me a question that surprised me. "Why are you still here?" I turned, unsure how to answer. "Because I care," I said finally. She studied me for a long time. Then she said, "You're a fool for wasting your kindness here. People take and take." I smiled gently. "Maybe, but some people give back too, eventually." She didn't reply. But the next day there was a teacup waiting for me on the nightstand. A second one. We began to talk more after that. Small things at first. I learned she used to be a classical pianist, that she'd travelled the world, that she once owned a vineyard in Italy and a villa in the south of France. I thought maybe she was exaggerating, weaving fantasy into memory. But when she spoke, her voice carried a conviction that made it hard to doubt her. Then, one afternoon, she looked at me and said, "Everyone left when the money dried up. Family, friends, all of them." I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there, holding her hand. "I think," she whispered, "you might be the first person in years who's listened to me without expecting something in return." I wanted to tell her that wasn't true, that surely someone had cared, but the words felt hollow. Because I knew she was right, and in that moment, something changed. Between us, the walls around room 107 softened. The air felt warmer, and I realized this wasn't just another patient. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Weeks passed. My shift routines became second nature. Check vitals, distribute medications, assist with meals. But no part of my day felt more purposeful than the time I spent with Eleanor. She began asking for me by name. Other nurses noticed. "What's your secret?" One asked. "I don't treat her like a patient," I replied. "I treat her like a person." In truth, Eleanor had become a friend. A complicated, sharp-tongued, no-nonsense friend who still corrected my grammar and scolded me for slouching. But a friend nonetheless. One rainy morning, I arrived to find her sitting, upright in bed, unusually alert. Her silver hair was brushed neatly, and her eyes, once tired and dull, had a flicker of something I hadn't seen before. She looked at me like she had a decision to make. "Sit," she said. I pulled up the chair beside her bed, noticing a small, leather-bound notebook on her lap. She ran her fingers over the cover before handing it to me. "I want you to read something," she said, "but not aloud." I hesitated, then opened the notebook. It was filled with handwritten letters to people who had long since disappeared from her life. Some were angry, some sorrowful, some simply lonely. Names like Thomas, Daphne, Richard, and then, halfway through, I saw mine. To the girl who reminds me what it means to be seen. I stopped. My throat tightened as I skimmed the words she had written about me, about how I listened without judgment, how I never rushed her, how, in the quietest ways, I'd made her want to live again, even if only for a few more weeks. When I looked up, she was watching me closely. "Why me?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. "Because you showed up," she replied, "when no one else did." I didn't know what to say, so I took her hand. Her skin was thin, fragile, but her grip was firm. "I'm not afraid of dying," she said quietly. "I'm afraid of being forgotten." "You won't be," I whispered. "I promise." She nodded once, then closed her eyes. That day, something shifted in me. I had entered this place just another nurse, another pair of scrubs. But Eleanor made me feel like more, like I mattered. I didn't know it yet, but those conversations, those quiet, honest hours in room 107 were changing the course of my life forever. It was a Friday afternoon, grey and still outside, with soft rain tapping against the windows of the care home. I was making my final rounds, checking charts and saying goodbye to each resident, when something stopped me. Eleanor's room was silent, too silent. I knocked gently and pushed open the door. The light was dim. Eleanor was lying in bed, her hands folded neatly on her chest, a faint smile frozen on her lips. She was gone. I stood there for what felt like hours, trying to process the emptiness in the room. The woman who had challenged me, softened me, and made me feel like I mattered was no longer breathing. A wave of sadness washed over me, raw and overwhelming. But strangely, I didn't cry. Instead, I walked to her bedside and sat down like I always did. I took her hand in mine and whispered a quiet, "Thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for everything I didn't yet understand." That evening, the care home called her lawyer, a man named Alan Whitmore, to handle the formalities. I assumed he'd come, do some paperwork, and that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. The following Monday, as I arrived for my shift, the receptionist stopped me. "There's a man waiting for you in the garden room," she said, confused. I walked down the hallway and into the garden room. There, seated in a tailored charcoal suit, was Alan Whitmore. He stood as I entered, holding a brown leather briefcase and a solemn expression. "Miss Ramirez?" he asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. He extended his hand. "I'm Eleanor's lawyer. She spoke very highly of you." I nodded, my chest tightening. "I'm sorry for your loss," he continued. "Eleanor passed peacefully, and she left behind a very detailed will." He motioned for me to sit, then opened the briefcase and retrieved a small stack of documents. "I'm here today because you need to hear something. Something Eleanor wanted you to know before the rest of the world finds out." My heart pounded. "She didn't just appreciate your kindness," he said. "She wanted to honor it. She made you the sole beneficiary of her estate." I blinked. What?" Alan unfolded the papers. Everything she owned, the mansion in Connecticut, the vineyard in Sonoma, the trust fund, the investments. "It's all yours. Her net worth is currently valued at just over $100 million. I froze. 100 million. I felt the air leave my lungs. No, I said quietly. There has to be a mistake. There's no mistake, Alan said gently. She made it very clear. She chose you, Miss Ramirez, because you were the one person who showed her unconditional care when everyone else had forgotten her. I stared at him, unable to speak. Eleanor believed that wealth should go to those who value life, he added, not those who chase it. And just like that, my world turned upside down. The nurse who came to this place to make ends meet was now the heir to a fortune. The news spread like wildfire. By the next morning, the care home wasn't the quiet, gentle place it used to be. Whispers followed me down the halls like shadows. Staff members who had barely acknowledged me before were now overly polite. Smiles appeared where indifference used to live. Even Mrs. Hadley, the no-nonsense, a head nurse, asked if I needed help with anything. Her voice softer than I'd ever heard, but I wasn't ready to talk. I needed to process. I kept thinking about Eleanor's face that last day, that peaceful smile, that knowing stillness. It was like she had planned everything. Down to the very minute, a final gift, wrapped in silence. That afternoon, Alan called again. There will be a formal reading of the will in 2 days, he told me. I suggest you prepare. Some of Eleanor's distant relatives have been notified. They'll be attending. I blinked. Relatives? She had a few, Alan said dryly. Estranged, greedy and absent until now. They were never part of her life in recent years. But they'll show up now that there's something to fight for. He wasn't wrong. 2 days later, I walked into a mahogany-panelled conference room in downtown Manhattan, my palms sweating, my nerves frayed. I wore the nicest thing I owned, a navy blue blouse and slacks, but I still felt like an outsider. Inside the room were 6 people already seated. Every single one of them looked like they belonged on a yacht. There was a man in his 50s with slicked-back grey hair and gold cufflinks, drumming his fingers on the table impatiently. A blonde woman with a pearl necklace and lips tight, like she'd smelled something rotten. A younger couple, influencers by the looks of it, whispering to each other while scrolling on their phones. And finally, a woman in her 40s who gave me one long, icy look, then turned away like I wasn't even there. Alan entered the room precisely at 10 a.m., carrying the same leather briefcase. "Thank you all for coming," he said with calm authority. "We are here for the official reading of Eleanor Whitmore's final will and testament." The room went silent. Alan opened the briefcase and took out a single document. "I will read it in full," he said. "Please hold any questions until the end." He cleared his throat. "To those who came late into my life or not at all, I leave nothing but a wish, that you live your days with the compassion you never showed me." The older man scoffed. "What the hell is this?" Alan held up his hand and continued. "To those who saw me only as a name on a bank statement, I offer no apologies, no explanations." The blonde woman looked like she'd just been slapped. And to the one who treated me with kindness when I was forgotten by the world. To the nurse who sat beside me when I was too weak to speak, who treated me like a person and not a task. I leave everything. There was a collective gasp in the room. My name was spoken, clear as crystal. "Elena Ramirez," Alan read, "is to inherit my estate in full, my properties, investments, assets, and personal effects. She is my chosen family." The silence was deafening. The older man stood up so quickly his chair screeched across the floor. "This is a joke. A nurse. She manipulated her." Alan calmly closed the folder. "Everything is legal and notarized. There are no loopholes. The estate belongs to Elena." They all turned to me. Their eyes burned with disbelief, some with fury, others with a kind of quiet, resentful curiosity. I stood there, frozen, unsure what to say. For the first time in my life, I had something no one could take away. Not because I was powerful, but because I was kind. And kindness, it seemed, was more powerful than I'd ever realized. The moment I stepped outside the law office, a gust of wind caught my breath, as if the city itself exhaled on my behalf. The world felt different, louder, bigger, and suddenly, mine. But peace doesn't last long when money's involved. My phone rang before I even reached the subway. Unknown number. I hesitated, then picked up. Elena Ramirez? A sharp female voice cut through. This is Clarisse Whitmore. You were just in that room with me. I hope you're enjoying your little Cinderella. A moment. Because it's not going to last. She didn't wait for me to respond. My mother may have been lonely and senile, but she was also easily manipulated. I don't care what some lawyer says. You think you're walking away with our family legacy? Think again. I have lawyers of my own. She hung up. My heart pounded. I felt that old familiar tremble. The kind that rises up from your stomach when you're being cornered, blamed, insulted. But then, something in me shifted. No, I wasn't just a nurse anymore. I was Eleanor's chosen heir, her voice, her memory, and I wasn't going to let anyone erase that. The next few days were a blur of headlines and tension. The news spread fast. Nurse inherits $100 million fortune. Family furious. From caregiver to heiress, the Elena Ramirez story. Reporters showed up outside the care home. Paparazzi followed me to my apartment. My landlord suddenly called to say he hoped I wasn't moving out too soon. Said he could upgrade the place if I wanted. I had to take a leave of absence from the home. Not because I wanted to, but because the other residents were being harassed by the press. And then came the lawsuits. Clarisse filed an official challenge to the will, citing undue influence and mental decline. Her brother joined her. Then a cousin. Suddenly they were all relatives of Eleanor, connected by blood, but never by heart. Alan reassured me the will was airtight. Eleanor planned for this, he said. She left recordings, letters, even a psychological evaluation done last year. She was sharper than anyone. Still, I couldn't shake the anxiety, the whispers in the news, the articles dissecting my past, strangers online calling me a gold digger. I felt like I was drowning in doubt, until one unexpected visitor arrived. It was Anna, a quiet woman from the care home kitchen. She was the kind of person people rarely noticed, always busy behind the scenes, humming to herself. She brought me soup, sat across, from me, and said, Eleanor used to talk about you, said you were the only one who treated her like a person, not a chore. She told me once, that girl, she'll change everything. I wiped away tears, because in a world that only measured value in status and wealth, Eleanor had seen something different in me, and now I had to prove she was right. Just when I thought things couldn't spiral further, I received a hand-delivered envelope. No return address, no markings, just my name in sharp black ink. I opened it cautiously, and inside was a single sheet of Eleanor's stationery, heavy ivory paper, her handwriting unmistakable. Elena, if you're reading this, I'm no longer here. But I knew this day would come, when the whispers would begin, when blood would scream louder than kindness, so I left behind something only you could understand. At the bottom was a simple instruction. Go to the greenhouse. I blinked. The greenhouse? Eleanor had mentioned it once in passing. A place behind the estate she rarely visited anymore because of her arthritis. I hadn't thought about it since the inheritance. But the next morning, I told Alan I needed access. He arranged it. The Thornridge Estate's greenhouse was something out of a forgotten fairy tale. Ivy-covered glass walls, overgrown ferns, and specks of golden dust that floated in beams of filtered sunlight. It had been untouched for years. But in the far corner, under a tarp, was a small wooden chest. Inside, dozens of letters, all handwritten, all addressed to me, some dated 5 years back, others only months ago. She had been writing me letters, stories, thoughts, and observations, while I was feeding her, walking her, reading to her. She had been documenting our journey, our friendship. Each letter was evidence of her clarity of mind, of her intentions, of her love for me. You reminded me I was still alive, Eleanor. I know my family won't. Understand they never made time to, but you did, when no one else would. Alan's hands trembled when I showed him the box. This is extraordinary, he said. It's not just proof, it's a chronicle. She built a case for you, quietly, thoroughly, lovingly. This could end everything. But the impact went beyond legal, because as I read her words, her memories of our shared meals, her notes about my silly impressions, her comments about my quiet strength, I felt a warmth grow inside me. This wasn't just about defending her will, it was about honouring her truth. The woman the world called eccentric, the recluse billionaire with no heirs, had quietly chosen me, not out of charity, but out of connection, and I wasn't going to let anyone erase her voice. From that moment on, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for Eleanor, for every forgotten soul society cast aside, for kindness over greed, and I finally knew this wasn't just my inheritance. It was my mission. Alan wasted no time. The very next day he arranged for the letters to be catalogued, scanned, and notarized. Each one was a testament not only to Eleanor's lucidity, but to the depth of our relationship. These weren't vague sentiments or ramblings. They were dated, emotional, specific, legal gold. But while we were preparing for truth, the others were preparing for war. It started with a knock at the door. 2 well-dressed men in tailored suits stood there. Eleanor's grandnephews, Marcus and Thomas. They had never visited her in the home, never written, never called. But now they were here, sunglasses still on indoors, voices syrupy and fake. "We think there's been a mistake," Marcus said smoothly, stepping into the hallway, as if it were his. "This whole inheritance situation, it's confused a lot of people," Thomas added. "We're just here to help you clear things up, before this gets messy." I kept my voice even. "It's already messy, and Eleanor's wishes were clear." They exchanged a look, subtle, cold. "We'll see what the judge thinks," Marcus said with a tight smile. "I hope you kept receipts." The following week was chaos. I was served court papers, a formal challenge to the will had been filed. They were accusing me of manipulation, of taking advantage of an elderly woman in mental decline. The media picked up the scent, nurse turned heiress, and suddenly I was the face of every gold digger stereotype ever written. They dug up old photos of me from college, blurry shots of me laughing in a bar, as if that proved I was untrustworthy. They questioned why a billionaire would leave her fortune to someone with no blood ties. They interviewed former employees who barely knew me. I stayed, silent. But inside, I was boiling. They were rewriting my story, turning my loyalty into a lie, my care into corruption. I wasn't a thief. I was a witness. To Eleanor's last years. To her heart, Alan reminded me every day. This isn't about what they say, it's about what we can prove, and we can prove everything. The trial date was set for 6 weeks later. Until then, I had one job, stay strong, but strength looked different now. It wasn't yelling or fighting or calling out every lie. It was remembering who I was and who Eleanor believed I was. Not a nurse, not a thief, but the woman she trusted to carry her legacy forward. And I wasn't going anywhere. The day of the hearing arrived with a sky so grey it looked painted. Rain tapped softly against the courthouse windows as I stepped inside, dressed simply. A navy blue blouse, black slacks, and Eleanor's silver brooch pinned just above my heart. I wasn't here to impress. I was here to honour the truth. The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension. Reporters filled the benches, their pens ready to twist any word into a headline. Marcus and Thomas sat confidently beside their high-powered attorney, whispering like frat boys before a prank. They smirked when they saw me, as if this was already won. Alan leaned over. "Don't react, let them burn themselves." Then the judge entered, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no tolerance for theatrics. What followed was a slow, methodical dissection of my life. Their lawyer painted me as an opportunist. He displayed my bank statements, showing how little I made. He played clips from a video someone had secretly taken of me exiting a thrift store, like it proved something sinister. He even implied I had targeted Eleanor. On purpose. But I didn't flinch. Then Alan stood. He walked the judge through Eleanor's deterioration and how I had stayed by her side, not for weeks, but for years. He presented the letters, the video messages Eleanor recorded, with timestamps, her handwritten journal entries, all of it crystal clear, all of it loving. Then came the moment that silenced the room. Alan played the final message Eleanor had left for me, one she had recorded just 2 weeks before her death. Her voice filled the courtroom. If anyone questions this, if they say I was confused, remind them I chose you, not because I had to, because I wanted to. You made me feel seen, safe, human, and you never asked for a penny. That's how I knew you were the one who deserved it all. The judge said nothing for a long time after the video ended, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steady. Unless the challengers have evidence of coercion or fraud, not assumption, evidence, this court sees no reason to invalidate the will. Marcus stood up. She manipulated her. You can't be serious. The judge narrowed her eyes. Sit down, Mr. Thornbridge. This isn't a movie. It's justice. The gavel fell, and with that, the case was closed. I had won. Not just the case. I had won Eleanor's truth back. But as I sat in the quiet hallway outside the courtroom, everything inside me trembled, not with fear, but with release. Because this wasn't just about money. It never was. It was about being believed. It was about being enough. And for the first time in years, I finally was. The mansion loomed before me like a memory I'd never owned. Eleanor's estate wasn't just a house. It was a world unto itself. Ivy-covered walls, grand windows that seemed to watch the horizon, and silence that felt sacred. I stood at the threshold with the keys in my hand, but for a moment I hesitated. Was I allowed to walk into this life? Then I remembered Eleanor's voice. You made me feel seen, safe, human. I stepped forward. The first few weeks were surreal. Rooms I'd only dusted before were now mine to fill. The piano in the sunroom, once just a backdrop to her stories, now played the notes of my healing. I opened the doors to the garden each morning, breathing in the roses she had loved. Her spirit lingered in everything. The books on her shelf, the faint scent of lavender, the teacups we used on quiet evenings. She was gone, but she was everywhere. But not everyone disappeared as easily. Marcus and Thomas had gone silent since the court ruling, but I knew that kind of bitterness didn't fade. Rumours swirled online. Clickbait headlines about the maid who got the mansion. But I didn't respond. I didn't have to. What mattered was the community. People began to recognise me not as Eleanor's caretaker, but as someone who had earned their respect. The local paper asked for an interview. A charity. Eleanor, once supported, reached out, hoping I'd carry on her legacy. Even a university invited me to speak about end-of-life care and dignity. 2 things most people only thought about when it was too late. I didn't say yes right away. I needed time to mourn, time to feel the weight of what had happened. Not just the betrayal, but the transformation. Because I wasn't just a nurse anymore. I wasn't just someone who held hands in hospital beds and whispered comfort into fading ears. I was a woman who had loved without expectation and been loved in return. One day, I sat in Eleanor's old office, now mine, and stared out the window as the sun poured over the hills. I opened the drawer she used to lock and found one last note. It read, "This house has seen pride, greed, and emptiness. But with you, it saw grace. Fill it with joy, with music, with kindness. You are its first true soul," I cried. But not because I was sad. I cried because I knew who I was now, and I was finally home. Word eventually spread, not just locally, but far beyond. Headlines read, "Nurse becomes heir to $100 million estate." My inbox exploded with messages. Strangers thanking me for my compassion. Journalists begging for interviews. Distant relatives I'd never heard of suddenly wanting to reconnect. And then came Marcus and Thomas. They didn't show up at the gate. No, that would have been too human. Instead, they filed an appeal, a legal challenge to Eleanor's will, claimed I had manipulated her. That she wasn't in a clear state of mind, that it was all a misunderstanding, a phase, a mistake. But I had kept everything: letters in Eleanor's handwriting, recordings of our conversations, her wishes, her reasoning, her trust in me, doctors, notes affirming her mental clarity, videos of her laughing with me over tea, of her calling me the closest thing I have to family. They didn't stand a chance, but they didn't come alone. Social media turned. Overnight, I became a symbol. And not everyone liked it. Gold digger, some called me. Opportunist. Old photos from my past were dredged up. Blurry images from high school parties. A picture of me hugging a boyfriend who turned out to be married. People love a scandal more than they love a success story. But I stood firm. Because I knew Eleanor. And more importantly, I knew myself. When the hearing came, I wore the same modest dress I used to wear to the care home. No designer label, no makeup artist, just me, because I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there to honor a woman who gave me more than money. She gave me my dignity, the judge ruled quickly. The evidence was irrefutable. Marcus and Thomas were dismissed, their greed exposed to everyone watching. And this time, the headlines changed. Grandsons lose inheritance, battle against beloved caregiver. I stepped out of the courtroom into a sea of microphones, and I said only one thing. Kindness is not a weakness, and love is not something you buy. It's something you give. That's what Eleanor taught me. The silence that followed was louder than applause. After the ruling, life changed. Fast, but not in the way people expect when they hear, you inherited $100 million. Yes, there were luxury offers, invitations to galas, parties, even TV deals. Fashion houses offered to dress me for free, as long as I smiled for their photographers. Real estate agents flooded my mailbox with mansions I deserved. But none of that mattered, because I remembered the tea room, the lavender perfume, Eleanor's voice, soft but sharp. Don't let money change you. Let it reveal who you really are. So I made a decision. I didn't buy a sports car. I didn't fly to Paris. I didn't move into a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling glass. Instead, I renovated the care home, the same walls where I once changed sheets and helped Eleanor walk again, now painted in warm tones with gardens built in her memory. We hired more staff, raised salaries, and installed a music therapy room. I created a foundation in Eleanor's name to support women in nursing school, especially those who worked 2 jobs like I did. The news didn't care much about that part, but the people who mattered did. Former residents wrote letters. One girl, barely 18, told me she never thought she could afford school until our scholarship paid her first semester. I saw myself in her, the fire, the fear, the hope. And then came the interview request from a national morning show. At first I said no, but Eleanor's lawyer, now a close friend, said, "The world needs to hear stories like yours, Julia. Stories with soul." So I sat under the studio lights, palms sweating, heart steady, and I told the world, I didn't become rich, I became responsible. Eleanor didn't give me her money, she gave me her trust, and I plan to honor it every single day. That clip went viral, but not because it was glamorous. It wasn't. It was real. And for the first time, I wasn't invisible. I was a nurse. I was an heir. But more than anything, I was finally seen. After the interview aired, my life split into 2 halves, the before and the after. Before, I walked through hospital halls unnoticed, a name tag, a stethoscope, a tired smile. After strangers stopped me in the grocery store to thank me. Young women sent letters. Elderly patients told me they saw Eleanor's eyes in mine. News articles called me the angel heiress. Blogs wrote headlines like, "From scrubs to silk, the $100 million nurse who didn't change." But the truth? I was still me, still Julia, still waking up early, still making tea the way Eleanor liked it, still unsure how to handle the weight of fame and wealth colliding. What changed was them. People who once overlooked me now stared too long. Those who dismissed me now wanted favors, donations, interviews, endorsements. I had to learn quickly. Who was real and who was rehearsing kindness for the cameras, I hired a small team. Just 2 people. Not a PR firm, not an agent. Just women who believed. In the mission, one of them, Clara, was a former nurse who left the field because of burnout. She said, "Helping you helps me remember why I started." We launched the Eleanor Project, fully funded, fully independent, a network for caregivers across the country, free therapy, career mentoring, emergency aid. Our slogan was simple. They cared for everyone, now we care for them. And while the press applauded the headlines and politicians smiled for photo ops, I focused on the work, late nights, budget sheets, visiting clinics in quiet towns, handing envelopes to women who couldn't afford diapers and medicine, hugging them, listening to them, reminding them. They matter because Eleanor didn't save me with money. She saved me with faith. And now I was passing it on. I knew it was only a matter of time before Eleanor's family came looking for me. They didn't show up at the funeral. They didn't check on her when she was sick. But when the world found out she'd left me everything, they came knocking, and not quietly. The first was her nephew, Lawrence. A man in his 50s with slicked back hair, polished shoes, and a lawyer by his side. He brought flowers to my apartment, smiled too much, and said words like influence and amicable arrangements. I didn't invite him in. The second came 2 days later, Eleanor's sister. She had the same eyes, but none of the warmth. She didn't bring flowers, just a thick manila folder and a thinly veiled threat. This inheritance belongs to the family. We'll fight it in court. I didn't argue. I didn't need to, because what they didn't know was that Eleanor had prepared everything, every document, every signature, every video. Her lawyer, now mine, had it all notarized. Time-stamped, bulletproof still, the threats came. Letters, public statements, even tabloids picking up their side of the story, calling me a gold digger, a fraud, a manipulator. One magazine ran a headline, "The Nurse Who Stole a Fortune," and for a moment I felt that shame crawling up again, that urge to hide, to shrink. But then I remembered Eleanor's words. They only win if you let them rewrite the story. So I told the truth. I released the videos. Eleanor in her own voice, thanking me, laughing with me, naming me as her legacy. I shared the letters she wrote me, in her careful cursive, calling me her daughter in spirit. And most of all, I shared the stories of the lives we were changing through the Eleanor Project. And slowly, the noise died down. The public saw the difference between a scandal and a sacrifice, and Eleanor's family. They vanished as quickly as they had arrived. No more threats, no more headlines, just silence. The kind that comes when the truth speaks louder than anything else. I didn't need to fight them. The truth had already won. Once the dust settled and the headlines faded, I was left with something far greater than money or scandal. I was left with a choice. $100 million wasn't just a number, it was a door, wide open, waiting for me to step through. For weeks. I barely slept, staring at spreadsheets, foundations, names of causes Eleanor once mentioned with passing love. I thought about retiring, running away, disappearing somewhere quiet and warm. But then I remembered the nights I spent by Eleanor's bedside, the way she held my hand even when she couldn't speak, the way her eyes softened when she talked about the years she wasted, building wealth, but never knowing who would truly carry it forward. She gave me more than her fortune. She gave me her unfinished dreams. So I began building. I turned the guest house, the one I used to clean, into a shelter for elderly women who had nowhere else to go. I used Eleanor's name, not mine, and told her story to every volunteer who walked through the doors. Then came the scholarships for girls in nursing programs who couldn't afford tuition. I read every essay personally. I cried over many of them. I saw pieces of myself in their words. Scared, tired, but unwilling to quit, I partnered with hospitals, funded mobile clinics, rebuilt wings that had been shut down for decades. Everywhere I went, I brought Eleanor's photograph, not for display, but for grounding, to remind myself why I was doing this, and still, there were moments I'd sit alone, wondering if I was doing enough, if I was worthy of all she gave me. But one morning, a young girl came into the shelter with her grandmother. She handed me a crayon drawing. It was me, standing beside a house with flowers and hearts around it. She wrote, "Thank you for giving us a home." That's when I knew. Eleanor's legacy wasn't in bank accounts or marble floors. It was in hearts rebuilt, hands held, and futures changed. And I was proud to carry it. It started with a small article in a local paper. Just a story about a former nurse who inherited a fortune and used it to help others. No sensational headlines, no scandal, just facts and quiet impact. But then the story caught fire. Reporters showed up at the shelter. Cameras followed me. Through hospital corridors, journalists begged for interviews. I refused most of them. This wasn't about fame. But one morning, I received a letter from a journalist who said, "The world needs to know stories like yours, not for the drama, for the hope." So I agreed to one interview, just one. They asked me what it felt like. To go from barely affording groceries to overseeing millions, I said, "It feels like a responsibility, not a reward." They asked what I'd say to people who laughed when I was just a nurse, pushing carts and changing sheets. I smiled, and I said, I was never just a nurse. I was a lifeline. I was a witness to pain, to dignity, to love at the end, and no amount of money will ever make that less important. The interview aired across the country, then across the world, and for the first time, people said my name with respect. I wasn't the story of a lucky girl. I was the story of love, loyalty, and purpose. Eleanor's former friends reached out, some with shame, others with admiration, but I didn't respond to most of them. They were the ones who couldn't see past the uniform. They never looked into my eyes the way Eleanor did. But there were others. Young nurses, women with nothing, students with dreams, who flooded my inbox with messages. Some simply wrote, "Because of you, I won't give up." And that was everything. I hadn't just inherited a fortune. I had become the voice for people who were always invisible. My name is Clara, and once I was just a nurse in a quiet care home. No spotlight, no riches, just small acts of compassion, repeated every day. But everything changed the day Eleanor passed away. She didn't just leave me her estate, she left me her faith that kindness still mattered, that dignity wasn't tied to status, that someone like me, someone unseen, could one day carry a legacy greater than gold. With the $100 million she entrusted to me, I didn't buy a mansion or disappear into luxury. Instead, I built the Eleanor Foundation, a network of homes, scholarships and community clinics for the elderly, the poor and the overlooked. We started small, just one city. But soon we expanded into 3, 5, 10. The name Eleanor became synonymous with hope, and mine. Clara finally meant something too. But more than that, I finally understood. It wasn't the money that changed me. It was the truth that someone had seen me fully, valued me when no one else did, and believed I was worthy of more. Today, I walk through the same halls I once cleaned. Nurses nod with pride when they see me. Elderly patients hold my hand like they used to, and somewhere I like to think Eleanor is smiling. Knowing her final act of love became a revolution for many. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever felt invisible, unappreciated, underestimated, hear me clearly. You are not small, you are not nothing, and sometimes the quiet heart carries the loudest legacy. My story began in silence, but now it echoes with purpose.